Hey guys, I'm Architect Jaja Madatu and welcome back to another episode of our Dialux Masterclass. On this episode, I'm going to give you a step-by-step tutorial on how I recreated this realistic looking interior in the Dialux Evo. And the interior design of this bedroom was inspired from this photo, and I managed to recreate the plan from that photo. And feel free to download this CAD file on the link written on the description below so that you could train along with me while watching this video. Okay, here's the CAD drawings for this tutorial. We have here the furniture layout and the reflected ceiling plan. I opted to separate the reflected ceiling plan drawing because once I'm going to recreate the ceiling design of this room, I won't be having too much distractions from the furniture drawings. And then we have here these two interior elevations. This interior elevation shows this side of the room, and the other interior elevation reflects the other side of the room, which is the bedroom side. The ceiling height of this room is 2.7 at the bedside area and then 2.5 on the entrance area. Now let's import this CAD file in the Dialux Evo. Now let's open Dialux Evo and select Outdoor and Building Planning. Now let's go to the Plan tab and let's import the CAD file. And let's select this corner as our point of origin. And then select meters onto the scale because the CAD file was done in meters. Click Finish. Now let's go to the Story tab and let's create new room. And then the ceiling height at 2.7 meters. That's okay because the ceiling height of this room is 2.7 meters. And the floor thickness at 0.2 meters. Let's just leave that floor thickness at 0.2 meters because we are just going to recreate a room. Now, if you have noticed that I traced these three sides of the wall on the outer part instead of the interior walls because I'm going to recreate these three walls using an extrusion object. And there's no way that you can recreate these wall designs with the wall elements. And I'm going to recreate these walls using the elevation drawings. Now going back, let's go to the site. And let's go to the Furniture tab and let's trace this wall using the extrusion body. Right click, close, and let's check the thickness of the wall. It's 0.15. Let's edit the height of the object at 0.15. Now as you can see that these wall designs are some sort of series of recessed layers, and these rectangular lines are kind of protruding frame design onto the wall. Now going back to the elevation drawings, let's use the extrusion body from the Furniture tab and let's trace the first subtraction objects of the first layer of recessed wall design. Right click, close. And then let's check the distance of that first layer from the outer wall. And that's going to be 0.13. And let's move this subtraction object 0.13 from the 0-Z axis. And let's use 0.1 meter as the height of the subtraction object. And make sure that the subtraction object must be taller or higher than the other object so that we could create a hole onto that object. Now let's trace the second subtraction object. And then let's check the distance from the outer wall. It's going to be 0.14. And let's move that object 0.14 from the 0z axis. And then let's use the same height, 0.1 meters. And let's duplicate these two subtraction objects for the upper part. Control C, Control V on your keyboard, and just move it onto the upper part. And let's retrace it according to the size. Right click, edit basic polygon. And then let's duplicate these four subtraction objects onto the other recessed wall. Control C, Control V on your keyboard, and just move it onto the other side. And then let's resize it according to the size of the recessed wall. And then let's duplicate again the first four subtraction objects onto the third recessed wall design. Control C, Control V on your keyboard. And let's combine all these subtraction objects. Let's go to the Copy and Arrange tab. And let's select all the subtraction objects. And then click Combine onto the Combine tab. And then let's go to the perspective view and do the subtraction method. Click the second object, which is the wall. And then let's go to the Copy and Arrange tab and go to the Subtract tab. Now let's do the subtraction. But before that, here's a tip. The objects that are highlighted in blue are going to be the subtraction objects. And the objects that is highlighted in pink is going to be the object to be subtracted. Now going back, let's click Subtract. Now let's go back to the plan view and let's trace these frame designs using the extrusion body. Right click, close. And then let's check the height. It's going to be 0.01. Let's edit the height at 0.01. And then instead of doing the subtraction method, let's just duplicate this and rotate it at 180 degrees. Control C, Control V. And then let's rotate that at 180 degrees onto the Z-axis. And then let's duplicate this onto the other recessed wall design. And then let's trace the smaller frame designs. Now we're done with this side of the wall. Let's combine all these objects, select all the objects, and let's go to the Copy and Arrange tab, and go to the Combine tab and click Combine. Now as you can see that the X and Y base point of this wall object is on the center of the object, and the Z base point is still onto the 0Z axis. Now let's rotate this object on the X-axis at 90 degrees. Now let's go to the perspective view and let's move this wall object aligned on the 0Z axis by simply dividing the supposed height of the wall, which is 2.7 meters, divided by 2. And that's going to be 1.35. And let's move this object 1.35 from the 0Z axis so that the bottom edge of this wall will be aligned on the 0Z axis. Now let's go back to the plan view And let's move this wall object onto the interior. Now let's go back to the perspective view and let's check that wall. I think we're good with this wall, and now let's trace the other two sides of the wall by using the elevation drawings. Now let's trace this side of the wall by using the same method that we did on the first wall. Let's use again the draw extrusion body. Let's leave this door opening open. Now let's check the thickness of the wall. Still, it's the same, 0.15. Let's edit the height of the object at 0.15. Now let's recreate this door. And assume that the height of the door will be 0.05. Now let's trace this recessed part of the door. Let's create a subtraction object. And let's move it 0.04 from the 0z axis because the height of the door is 0.05. And let's use 0.1 meter as the height of the subtraction object. Now let's duplicate this subtraction object, Ctrl+C, Ctrl+V on your keyboard, and then rotate it 180 degrees on the z-axis. And then let's combine these two subtraction objects. Before we do the subtraction method, let's apply a different color material texture onto this subtraction object so that later on we can easily just apply a different texture onto the recessed part of the door. Now let's do the subtraction method. Go to the Copy Arrange tab and click the Subtract tab and then click Subtract. Now let's move this door probably 0.07 meters from the 0z axis and let's recreate the frame design of the door opening. Let's use again the extrusion body to trace the frame. Let's check the thickness of the frame, which is 0.025. Let's edit the height, 0.025 meters. And then let's move the object 0.15 from the 0z axis because the thickness of the wall is 0.15. And then let's create a subtraction object for this recessed part of the frame. Let's use 0.1 meter as the height of the subtraction object. And then let's check the distance of the subtraction object from the outer wall, which is 0.167. Let's move that subtraction object 0.167 from the 0z axis. Now let's subtract this subtraction object onto the frame. Go to the Copy Arrange tab and then click Subtract. Now let's go back to the plan view and let's recreate this recessed part of the wall just like the previous wall. Now let's trace the first subtraction object. And let's use 0.1 meter as the height of the subtraction object and let's check the distance from the outer wall. That's going to be 0.13. Let's move it 0.13 from the 0z axis. And then let's trace the second subtraction object. And let's use 0.1 meter as the height of the second subtraction object. And let's check the distance from the outer wall. It's going to be 0.14. Let's move it 0.14 from the 0z axis. Now let's combine these two subtraction objects. Now let's subtract. Let's select the wall object and go to the subtract tab and then click subtract. Now let's go back to the plan view and let's trace the frame. Now let's check the height of the frame and the distance from the outer wall. The height is 0.01 and the distance would be 0.13. Let's edit the height 0.01 and then 0.13 from the 0z axis, and let's duplicate this object. Ctrl C, Ctrl V on your keyboard and then rotate it 180 degrees on the Z axis and then move it onto the other side. Now let's combine these objects. Now let's add color texture so that later on we could easily just apply different texture onto this object. Now let's go back to the plan view. Now let's add another object on the center for the mirror. And let's probably use 0.005 as the height, and let's move it 0.13 from the 0z axis, and let's add another color texture onto this one. Now before we combine all these objects, let's duplicate the frame and the door so that we could use this onto the other door. Ctrl C, Ctrl V on your keyboard, and let's just move it somewhere else. Now let's combine all these objects and click combine. And then let's rotate this wall object on the x-axis at 90 degrees. And then let's move this wall object aligned on the 0z axis by simply dragging it on the elevation view instead of the method that I did a while ago. Now let's move this on the interior and let's rotate it 180 degrees on the Z axis, and then let's just drag it onto the exact location. Let's check. Okay, I think we're good onto this wall. Let's add another object on top of this wall so that we could have a 2.7 meter wall. The height would be 0.2, and let's move it 2.5 from the floor. Okay, I think we're good now on this side of the wall. And then let's trace the wall on the door entrance. Let's edit the height at 2.7. And then let's move it to 0z axis. And then let's create a subtraction object for the door opening. And let's edit the height. Let's check the height of the door. That's going to be 2.15. Let's edit the height of the subtraction object at 2.15. And then let's move it to the 0Z axis. And then let's do the subtraction. Now let's go back to the plan view and let's combine the duplicated frame and door. And then let's rotate it 90 degrees on the x-axis. And then let's move it on to the 0Z axis. Now let's move it on to the interior and let's rotate it 90 degrees on the 0Z axis. Oh no, should be negative 90. And then let's snap it on to the exact location. Now let's check. Okay, now we're done on these three walls. Let's move on to the niche and the headboard. Now let's go back to the plan view and let's recreate the niche and the headboard on the elevation drawings. Let's go back to the site. Now let's start with the first niche. Let's use again the extrusion body and let's trace this niche. Let's check the width of the niche. That's going to be 0.4. Let's edit the height of this object to 0.4. Now let's trace the frame design of the niche. Now let's check the thickness of the frame. And that's going to be 0.01. Let's edit the height, 0.01. Now let's go to the perspective view and let's combine these objects. And then let's go back to the plan view and let's create a subtraction object for the niche. Let's check the distance from the back edge of the niche. And that's going to be 0.165. Let's move that subtraction object 0.165 from the 0Z axis. Now let's use 0.5 meter as the height of the subtraction object. Now before we do the subtraction, let's add another color texture onto this subtraction object. Now let's do the subtraction method. And then let's combine these objects. And then let's rotate these on the x-axis at 90 degrees. Then let's go to the elevation view. And let's move it on to the 0Z axis. Now let's move it on to the interior. And let's rotate it at the Z-axis at 180 degrees. And then let's snap it on to the exact location. Now let's duplicate this niche onto the other niche. Ctrl-C, Ctrl-V on your keyboard. And then let's move it on to the other niche. Now let's trace the headboard. Now let's check the height of the first layer of the headboard. It's going to be 1.3. Let's edit the height 1.3. And then let's move it on to the 0J axis. And then let's trace the second layer of the headboard. And let's check the height of the second layer of the headboard. And that's going to be 1.28. And let's check the distance from the floor. That's going to be 0.01. Now let's edit the height. 1.28 and then 0.01 from the finished floor line. Now let's check. Okay, that ends the first part of this tutorial, and on to the next part. We are going to recreate the ceiling design of this room, and also I'm going to teach you on how to recreate a ceiling cove design using the ceiling elements of the Dialux Evo. And feel free to download the CAD file of this tutorial so that you can train along with me while watching this video. And lastly, before I end this video, I want to take this opportunity to tell you that the episode 2 of our Dialux Masterclass onto our Patreon account were already uploaded, so feel free to check this out because it's gonna be an interesting episode. So I'll see you on to the next part of this tutorial. So, if you want to learn, master, and create reality with your lighting simulations, you can watch our series of video tutorials onto our Patreon accounts. Links are written on the description below. You can follow our social media accounts. Feel free to subscribe and click that notification bell to get real-time updates on the upcoming episodes of our Dialux Masterclass. I'll see you.